Uh, okay. I need to tell you something that I have been sitting with since the moment I connected with your energy today. Something that arrived with a force and a specificity that made me pause before I even began to organize how to deliver it. Because what I am reading is not a gentle situation. It is not something I can describe in soft language and careful framing without doing a disservice to the actual reality of what has been happening. So I am going to be direct, more direct than I sometimes am, because you deserve directness right now more than you deserve comfort. And because the situation you have been in, the specific, layered, been going on longer than it should have situation, has been dressed in enough comfortable language already, has been softened enough, has been given enough generous interpretations and patient understandings and benefit of the doubt extensions that the actual shape of it has been obscured, even from you, especially from you, because you are someone who looks for the good, who finds the explanation that makes the behavior acceptable, who applies the kind of thorough, generous, this is why they are the way they are analysis that keeps you invested in people past the point where the investment is serving you. And someone has been benefiting from that generosity enormously for a very long time while covering something up, something that has been at the center of arguments that were real and significant and that pointed directly at a truth that kept being redirected away from every single time. That redirection is ending, and what is being exposed is something you were right about the whole time. Let me describe the person I am reading about in your energy, because I want you to recognize them before I describe what they have done. This is not someone on the periphery of your life, not someone who had limited access to you or limited ability to affect you. This is someone you let in, someone you trusted with the real version of yourself, someone who had access to the parts of you that you do not make casually available, the careful parts, the trusting parts, the parts that only emerge when you have decided someone is safe enough to receive them. You decided they were safe. That decision was made in good faith, based on what they presented, based on the version of themselves they allowed you to see, based on a picture that was not complete, that was in significant ways curated, not entirely false, curated, assembled to show you the parts that would secure your trust and obscure the parts that might have complicated it. They are good at that, better than you realize, better than most people realize until the curation collapses and what was being managed becomes visible. And the curation has been collapsing slowly at first in the inconsistencies you noticed but explained away, in the moments that did not quite add up but that you filed generously as misunderstandings, in the arguments, the specific arguments that kept circling the same territory without ever arriving at resolution. Because resolution would have required honesty about what the arguments were actually about. And that honesty was the one thing they were most invested in not providing. Let me tell you about the arguments, because they are the heart of this reading and they deserve to be addressed directly rather than circled. The arguments you had with this person were not actually about what they appeared to be about on the surface. You sensed that. You felt it in the way that arguments feel when they keep returning to the same ground without the ground ever changing, without the resolution ever actually landing in a way that holds, without the understanding that should have followed the conversation actually arriving. You felt the underneath of those arguments, the thing they were really about, even when you could not fully name it, even when the words available to you were about the surface issue, and the real issue kept slipping through your grasp before you could hold it still enough to examine it. The real issue was this. They were not being honest with you about something specific, something they knew you would have a significant response to if you knew the full truth of it, something that would have changed how you read the situation and how you positioned yourself within it, and possibly whether you remained in it at all. They knew that, and so the arguments, which were pointing in the direction of that truth, were redirected every time with skill, with the particular skill of someone who has had practice at keeping certain conversations from arriving at certain destinations. Who knows how to make the person asking the real question feel like the question itself is the problem? Like their concern is the issue. Like their instinct is the thing that needs to be examined and questioned and perhaps let go of, rather than the behavior that produced the instinct in the first place. You have been made to feel like your perception was the problem. Like your sensing of something not adding up was a flaw in your sensing rather than an accurate read of something that genuinely did not add up. That gaslighting, because that is what it was subtle enough that you may not have fully named it as such. But it was real, and it has been doing damage that I want you to understand clearly before we go any further. The damage is this. Every time you were made to feel that your instinct was wrong, every time the argument that was pointing at something real was redirected back onto your sensitivity or your misreading or your tendency to overthink, a small amount of your trust in yourself was eroded. Not dramatically, incrementally. In the way that sustained, repeated, subtle redirection erodes self-trust in people who are reflective enough to genuinely consider the possibility that they might be wrong. And you are reflective enough. That is one of the qualities that makes you exceptional. Your willingness to examine yourself, to hold the question of whether you are reading things correctly rather than assuming your first read is always right. That quality was turned against you in this dynamic. Your openness to being wrong was used to keep you from being certain that you were right. And you were right. The instinct that kept surfacing in those arguments, the one that said something here does not add up, the one that said this resolution is not real, the one that said there is something I am not being shown that would change how I understand this whole situation, that instinct was accurate from the beginning. You were not overthinking. You were not being too sensitive. You were not creating problems where none existed. You were reading something real that you were being systematically and skillfully prevented from reading clearly, and that prevention was deliberate. That is the part that I want you to sit with. Not because I want you to be angry, though anger would be entirely justified, but because I want you to stop questioning yourself about this. Your instincts were right. They have always been right about this. And the thing they were pointing at is now becoming visible. whether this person wants it to or not. Let me tell you about the mess up, because the title of this reading uses strong language, and I want to honor that language with equal directness. What this person has done is significant, not in the way that ordinary relationship failures are significant. In the specific way that a sustained, deliberate, this required, ongoing effort to maintain cover-up is significant, because what they have been concealing did not conceal itself. They had to actively manage it, had to make daily, ongoing, conscious choices about what to show you and what to withhold. Had to remember what version of the story they had told, in which context. Had to navigate the arguments that kept pointing in the direction of the truth without ever letting those arguments arrive at the truth. That takes sustained effort, sustained deception, the kind that does not happen accidentally or in a single moment of poor judgment, the kind that is chosen repeatedly, over time, with full awareness of what is being withheld and why, and what the consequence of your knowing would be. They chose this not once, every day that the cover continued, every argument that was redirected rather than honestly engaged with, every moment where the truth was available to be spoken and was not. Every time you felt that instinct and were made to feel like the instinct was the problem, each of those was a choice. And the accumulation of those choices is what I mean when I say they messed up so badly. Not a moment of weakness. A pattern of deliberate choices made at your expense over a period of time that you deserve to spend differently. Now I need to tell you what is happening to that cover right now, because this is the part of the reading I feel most specifically and most clearly, the part that I want to make sure reaches you before we close. The cover is not holding. Something has changed in the structural integrity of what they have been maintaining. Something that was holding the concealment in place has shifted. And in that shifting, gaps are appearing, small ones at first, inconsistencies that are becoming harder to explain, stories that are beginning to contradict each other in ways that people are starting to notice. Not just you, other people who have pieces of the picture, people who have been holding separate fragments of information that are beginning through the ordinary movement of conversation and connection to find each other, to fit together into a shape that tells a different story from the one that has been circulating, a more complete story, a more honest one. And as these fragments find each other, as the picture assembles itself from its scattered pieces, what is becoming visible is what you were sensing in those arguments all along. The thing that was being covered, the thing you were made to feel you were imagining, it was not imagined. It was real, and it is now assembling itself into a form that cannot be redirected and cannot be reframed and cannot be pointed back at your sensitivity, because it exists independently of your perception. It is simply true. And true things, once they are visible to enough people to no longer require any one person's perception to sustain them, cannot be covered again. That point is approaching faster than they expected, faster than they thought possible, given how carefully they managed everything. I want to speak to what this person is experiencing right now on their end. because I think understanding it is going to help you make sense of any recent changes in their behavior, any shifts in how they are engaging with you or with others, any quality of something that feels slightly off, slightly more careful, slightly more managed than usual, or conversely, slightly more erratic, slightly less controlled than the precision they usually maintain. They are managing fear, the specific fear of someone who has built a structure that is starting to show signs of instability and who does not know exactly where the weak point is or exactly when the instability will become visible to the people it most needs to remain invisible from. That uncertainty is producing behaviors that are slightly out of character because their usual approach, the calibrated, managed, everything under control approach, requires a level of composure that is becoming harder to maintain as the pressure of what is coming increases. And the pressure is increasing not because anyone is deliberately applying it, because the truth has its own pressure, its own weight, its own momentum toward visibility. And they can feel that momentum. Even if they cannot name what is producing it, they feel the ground shifting, the thing they have been maintaining becoming harder to maintain, the cover requiring more energy than it used to require, because more things are pressing against it from more directions simultaneously, and energy spent on maintaining a cover is energy that is no longer available for the performance of everything being fine. The cracks are beginning to show in the performance, and people are starting to notice the cracks. Let me speak directly to you now about what I need you to hear most clearly from everything I have said, because this reading is not ultimately about them. It is about you, about what this situation has cost you, about what the sustained questioning of your own instincts has done to your trust in yourself, about the particular damage that comes from being a perceptive person in a dynamic that systematically redirected your perception back onto itself. That damage is real. And I want to name it clearly so that you can begin to understand it as damage rather than as evidence that your perception is flawed. Your perception is not flawed. Your perception was weaponized against you by someone who understood that your willingness to examine yourself was an opening they could use, who found in your reflectiveness and your generosity and your genuine desire to be fair the specific tools they needed to keep the cover intact. That is not a failure on your part. That is a testimony to the quality of your character being encountered by the calculating quality of theirs. And the fact that it worked for as long as it worked is not evidence that you were gullible or naive or insufficiently careful. It is evidence that you trusted someone who had specifically learned to appear trustworthy to someone with your particular way of seeing the world. You were not fooled by accident. You were fooled by someone who was working at it. And the difference between those two things is everything. Do not let this experience teach you to stop trusting. Let it teach you to trust your instincts earlier, to act on the first clear signal rather than waiting until you have accumulated enough evidence to overcome the generous interpretation. You were always inclined to extend. The instinct was right the first time. It is almost always right the first time. Trust it the first time. There is something I want to say about justice because it is present in the energy of this reading and it deserves to be named. What is happening right now? The cover beginning to fail, the truth assembling itself from its scattered pieces, the behavior that concealed things beginning to reveal the pressure of what it is concealing. None of that is something you engineered. None of that required your intervention or your effort or your deliberate action to produce. You did not do this to them. They did this to themselves through the accumulation of choices made at your expense, through the sustained maintenance of a deception that required ongoing effort and ongoing dishonesty and ongoing disrespect for your right to the truth. Those choices have weight. They have consequence, and the consequence is arriving not through anyone's orchestration, but through the simple mechanical reality that structures built on concealment eventually reach a point where the concealment costs more than the structure can sustain. That point has arrived, and what collapses when it arrives is not your perception of what was happening. What collapses is their version of the story. The one that kept redirecting the arguments, the one that made you question your instincts, the one that required your continued generosity and your continued patience and your continued willingness to extend benefit of the doubt in order to remain functional. That version is collapsing. And what is being revealed underneath it is what you knew, what you have always known, what the arguments were always trying to arrive at before they were redirected. The truth, finally uncovered, not by you, by itself. The way truth always eventually uncovers itself. Let me close with this, because there is one thing above everything else that I want you to carry from this reading. One thing that I want to be sitting in you long after the details of what I have described have settled into understanding. You were not wrong. Not about what you sensed, not about what you felt in those arguments, not about the thing that kept surfacing no matter how many times it was redirected. You were not being dramatic. You were not overthinking. You were not creating problems where none existed. You were perceiving reality accurately in a dynamic that was specifically designed to make you doubt your perception. And the fact that you are here, that you made it through that sustained questioning of your own instincts without losing them entirely, without arriving at the place where you fully believed the story they were telling about your perception, is a testament to something in you that is very hard to destroy. A core knowing, a bedrock relationship with your own truth that the redirecting and the reframing and the sustained effort to make you doubt yourself could not reach completely. It bent, it was bruised, it became uncertain in ways it should not have had to be uncertain, but it did not break. You are still here, still in possession of the instincts that were right all along, still capable of recognizing the truth when it arrives, even after everything that tried to make you incapable of trusting what you recognize. That is extraordinary. And what comes next for you? The clarity that is arriving as the cover fails and the truth assembles itself and the arguments finally arrive at their actual destination is going to feel like something you have been waiting for a very long time, because you have been patiently, stubbornly, with the particular persistence of someone who knew they were right and kept knowing it, even when knowing it was the loneliest and most exhausting thing in the room. The loneliness is ending, the exhaustion is ending, and what replaces them is something you have fully earned. The truth out in the open, finally, completely, and entirely on your side.